Welcome to the Packers Weekly Podcast, part of PackersTalk.com network. I am your host, Miles Teddick, joined by your co-host, Tim Hamilton. We are diehard Packers fans, just love talking about the Pack. We're not getting into all the national sports media talking points and all their nonsense. We're sticking with real football, and we're sticking to the Packers. So even some former Packers that tend to get a lot of national attention, we're done because they're not Packers anymore. So that's where we are. That's what we're doing every week here on Monday evenings at 9:30. Come join us, hang out with us. We're covering the games during the season, but right now we're in full swing of the offseason and the drama and the rumors of the offseason. So we're going to be diving into that, including some more draft talk. We're getting into some more prospects here. Finishing off our running backs and linebackers, got a few things to talk about there. And then getting into some receiver and cornerback talk, which is definitely going to take more than one episode anyway, so strap in for that. Tim, good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are you?
Doing good. I'm kind of surprised by a few things that have happened since the last time we talked, right?
Yeah.
Like we were pretty excited about the free agent moves that happened a week ago. And then since then, we've got a few now to talk about, a few re-signings, Nixon, A.J. Dillon, a little bit of surprise there. A few signings that have happened elsewhere. Some fun stuff has happened on Twitter with Campbell. That was pretty fun. We'll get into that because we did partake in it a little bit at least. But before we get started, got a few words about our sponsor, Wisconsin's own Ticket King. For over 30 years, Ticket King has been providing Packers tickets to Packers fans. You can find them on the web at theticketking.com or visit their locations in Green Bay and Milwaukee. For direct links to specific Packers game tickets, go to packerstalk.com/tickets or browse the website at theticketking.com. All right. So if you need your Packers tickets, you know where to go now. So we've got some official business taken care of. Let's dive into the fun stuff, man. Did you see what was going on with Campbell on Twitter?
I did. Yeah, he got a lot to say on his way out the door to San Francisco, but some interesting, perspective from Campbell, and it was kind of, I guess, in a way, reaffirming the things that we've kind of talked about all season, or I guess now that the season's over, we talked about it last season, but discussing Joe Barry's defense and saying how he was misused and other players were misused in it. It's nothing new that we haven't already thought and said previously, but it was
Right.
just kind of eye-opening to hear it come from a player who was playing in that system and like openly come out there and bash his coaches on his way out the door. So there's a couple different ways to look at it. And
I think what you just said was very important, though, because there were some people who maybe got out of line on this. He bashed some coaches, okay? He did not bash the organization. He was very specific that he didn't even bash fans, although there were a few of you that mouthed off and deserved to be bashed, so you did get that. But no, he was very specific about, and it was not just one coach. It was a couple of coaches, right?
yeah, it was Joe Barry that he used
Right.
Barry's name,
Right.
and Kurt Olivadotti was the inside linebackers coach, and he didn't say anything by name, but that's his coach in his room. And it's also interesting that Olivadotti was one of the coaches that the Packers allowed to leave. They weren't interested in keeping him on the new staff.
Right.
So, not saying, he was bad at his job. Not saying that's necessarily who Campbell's bashing, because I don't want to put words in his mouth. But put two and two together, you got to assume Kurt Olivadotti is one of the guys he was talking about. So, it's nothing that's too surprising. The surprising part is just having a player come out and say things like that.
Right. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, and I think he's fine to say it. Like, it's nice to hear it, to hear somebody be open about it. And I think there's a certain, and we saw some of these people on Twitter when he was, going through his responses and posting what he posted, kind of rip him for saying things. And it's like, well, you can't have it both ways. You can't want the coaches or Matt LaFleur or the players during the season to like say more and give you more and say, give you an answer for why things are happening the way they are. And then when a player does it, bash him for being disrespectful. Like, you can't have it both ways. So I have no problem with him saying it. Um, and it was refreshing to hear a player speak that honestly. But I also think you kind of got to take what he was saying with a grain of salt, because I think there is some bitterness there, and I think there's some sour grapes. I'm not saying he was wrong. I mean, we talked all season about how Barry was misusing guys and how his system wasn't built to
Right.
get the most out of his players. So, like, completely agree, and we all saw that with our own eyes for 3 seasons. But Devondre Campbell was also an all-pro his first season playing in this defense. And the last 2 years he fell off. And he can come out and say, well, the first year I wasn't listening to the coaches. I was just doing what I was doing, which is kind of what he said in one of his tweets. And then the next season he tried to be a team player, as he called it, and buy into what they were doing. And that's when his production fell off. Maybe, but I don't necessarily believe that. Your first year at the organization, you're on a 1-year prove it deal, and you're going to come in and say, I'm going to do my own thing. Like, I would think that's the season that you're buying in, that you're listening to your coaches and doing what's asked of you, because you have a lot to prove as a football player. And I also saw a player the last 2 years that was injured a lot and was much slower to react, didn't make very many plays, missed tackles, this foot speed looked much slower than it did in 2021. We can blame injuries, but he had a neck injury in 2023. I don't know how that would affect his, how fast he is.
It might
His
hesitation. There's a few
Yeah, I mean,
things.
maybe, but I feel like his game fell off. So you
Yeah.
can't blame it all on the coaches. You have to accept responsibility. So I like, I like that he said what he said. It kind of reaffirmed some things, but it doesn't change my feelings on the fact that I agree with the Packers for moving on from him. I think it was time. I think his contract, his age, the injuries, and the fall off in his play the last 2 years justify them moving on. I have no problem with them moving on, but
Totally agree with that.
it's just more proof that they were right to also move on from Joe Barry and some coaches on that staff, and they probably should have moved on from him. Not probably, they definitely should have moved on from Joe Barry a lot sooner than they did. So, that's kind of what I got out of it. It was just, I think initially it was just eye-opening to see that coming from a player who's, just out the door, just fresh off the team, to be coming out and be that candid and honest with his opinion of what was going on.
Well, I was glad he did, because I felt like the initial responses from some folks was not accurate, right? Like, there were people saying that, what do you mean you got paid? What do you mean you're the starter? What do you mean,
Yeah.
what else would you want? And it's like, okay, but y'all are also the same people that agreed that Joe Barry's scheme was not good, right? Like, what do you mean? Why is it confusing when the guy says he was misused in a scheme that we can all agree was not good, right? Termination worthy. And that's where, we got involved, and we were one of the retweets that he was slinging out there Sunday morning. But yeah, it was just very simple. It's like, why didn't we ask him what he meant by misused, instead of jumping out there and be like, well, you this and you that, and you're ungrateful. And it's like, yeah, but he's got a point. Like,
Yeah.
let's hear the man out, instead of just immediately jumping out. And I'll say this, Packers fans, it's definitely kind of instinctive to jump out and protect the organization, right? Like, you're like, hey, this is my team, man, go be a 49er
Yeah.
now.
Right.
But at the same time, he's basically just agreeing with everyone on his way out, right? Like, we all agreed that Barry had to go. The scheme wasn't good. He's pointing that out in ways that I think maybe some people don't understand, because he is using a lot of football lingo. And, there's one where he's, where he says, because we ran a split safety system, meaning we used our safeties a lot in the run fit. So if I shoot my gap before the safety triggers, we can get gas. gashed. So most of the time, me and Quay were just trying to buy time for our safeties to get there. And it's like, that is a phenomenal explanation. A lot of people aren't going to get that, right? Like, you're going to need that kind of explained to you maybe a little bit more. And the comments probably did that. I haven't gone through all of this, but I love that he's putting that out there. And some other players jumped in and were kind of like, hey, y'all should pay attention to what he's saying, which is interesting. But
yeah, and to your point, I'm sorry, I don't mean to,
no,
but
go ahead.
I think he had another tweet too, and I don't have it in front of me, but talking about how there were players messing up run fits, how there were blown coverages and stuff like that. That
Right.
goes into, the scheme and the coaching.
Exactly. And that's where it's like, let's not just shoot the man on his way out because oh, you slowed down. Oh, you sucked after being an all-pro because you got your money. Let's look at it. Because, you can look at it on the surface and say, yeah, you got paid, and then there was a drop-off. Okay. Now, I will say, and this is just take it for what it's worth, because we're gonna bash PFF later, too. Or maybe not bash him, but we've certainly got disagreements with him. But as far as his PFF grade goes, his last two seasons, 22 and 23, were still better than any seasons before his all-pro season when he came to the Packers, right? So he's still far better than what he was before he came to the Packers. And that's where he was very clear on saying, I appreciate this organization. And he did. He played better in Green Bay than he did anywhere else. So I think it's just important to call these things out and let's be clear on what the guy is trying to say. But it is fascinating, and you're probably never going to get better information than when you get candid information from players. And I say that a lot. We'll probably continue to say that a lot. But when these guys start spouting off things that they don't have to say, it's like, that's probably pretty honest stuff, right? Like, this is just stuff they
Yeah.
don't have to give you.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's anything he stands to gain by lying to people at this point. But it was really, really interesting. So for those who are not on Twitter and didn't get to witness Devondre Campbell going off on Sunday morning, it was pretty interesting. I'm sure some of the other radio outlets and stuff have covered it, but definitely wanted to get our take in there on that one because it was pretty fascinating, and it does it just kind of reconfirms. And if you listen to some of the themes of the Hafley conference when they introduced him and LaFleur spoke, it aligns with some of this stuff, right? He talks about, well, you can't make Quay think. You can't make a dog think. It's like, that's exactly what they're saying. We're going to simplify this thing. We're going to communicate well so that there is no thinking. You're out there reacting, right? And that's what Campbell means by that. And so anybody who's worried about maybe Quay Walker being misused, I don't think that's an issue at this point, especially with the new staff. But great insight there. Great insight there from Devondre Campbell.
Yeah. And he was saying, for any Packer fan that got upset for him for saying it, it's the same thing we've been saying about Barry's defense for 3 years now as Packer fans. So for a player to come out and say, even though he's now on another team, like, you can't get upset about it. He's telling you, he's agreeing basically what we've been saying. And he's telling you what really happened. So don't be upset about it. Take it as good knowledge from a guy who lived it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's rich stuff right there. So yeah, then we got some free agency updates, some things that have happened in Packerland and free agency. The quick ones, you announced the really big one last week, and I'm kind of embarrassed that we didn't rename our episode more appropriately. But Tyler Davis was re-signed.
Thank God.
Keyshawn Nixon was also re-signed. I'm actually pretty excited about that. I think he brings a good leadership element, and he's an all-pro returner. Our special teams are pretty much bad outside of the all-pro returner. So let's keep the one bright spot that we got there.
Yeah.
And then A.J. Dillon, man. What a surprise. So.
Yeah. I mean, that to me, that's the biggest surprise, but it's a cheap deal. I mean, they got him for next to nothing with really no guarantees that they even keep him. I mean, I can't imagine they cut him, but there is a scenario where, maybe a young back that they draft and maybe Emmanuel Wilson have very good training camps and Dillon doesn't. And they decide we're going to go with the two younger backs and let Dillon go. It really wouldn't hurt him too much from a cap standpoint or a cash standpoint. But I would think he's going to be on the team, and I'm fine with that. Like, he gives you another experience back. You know what you're going to get with it with Dylan, and you also know what you're not going to get, which is fine. But it allows you to have a veteran who's been in the league and not force a rookie, who they're potentially going to draft into a big role, which,
Right.
yeah, it's running back two, but running back two is going to play. I mean, LaFleur shows he rotates his. Now, he had to do that because Aaron Jones was a smaller back, but just because Jacobs was this big, head season with 300 carries in Vegas, he's not going to do that in Green Bay. Yes, he's going to get the ball a lot, but it's not going to be at the levels he was getting it in Vegas just because I think they want to keep him fresh. They want to keep him healthy. And I think LaFleur just likes to get that rotation. So now you don't have to force a potential rookie into that role. You have A.J. Dillon, and you allow, a rookie or Emmanuel Wilson, whoever the third back will be, to kind of ease their way in and find a role. And, if they come into camp and they take the team by storm, great. Then you can get them on the field. But if they're not ready, then they're your third back, and that's fine. So it gives them more flexibility and doesn't force them to do something.
Yeah, I agree. And my first thought, and we're gonna go through running backs again here in a little bit, so we'll kind of fit some of these puzzle pieces together. But my first thought was like, oh man, maybe Braylon Allen's off the board now. But I also think maybe not. Right?
Yeah.
I believe somebody pointed it out. Maybe it was Ken Ingalls, but that they can basically cut AJ Dillon in camp.
Mm-hmm.
If they need to. The contract
Yeah.
doesn't bind them there. So if you get the draft board to fall the way that you want, maybe you do get both a Jalen Wright and a Braylon Allen. That then is there room for an AJ Dillon, or you just let him duke it out in camp? I mean, there's a lot of interesting ways that could happen.
Yeah.
So
It,
we'll
it gives
see.
them it gives them a ton of possibilities, and it's similar to the moves that they've made in the past, where they're able to, add a veteran or something like that, or keep guys that we weren't expecting, so then they can go into the draft and they're not pressed to absolutely take a running back, and then if they do, they can take who they want. And the commitment to Dylan's so minimal. It's a 1-year deal. So you're still, if you're drafting somebody, that running back's for not only 2024, but he's for the next several years. And you hope Josh Jacobs you're going to have for the next several years.
Right.
Whereas Dylan, you're just looking at it as a 1-year deal, and then we'll see what happens. So yeah, it leaves everything open, all the possibilities, whether it's Braylon Allen, whether it's Jalen Wright, who's the faster back, whatever they want to do. It doesn't stop them from doing anything, and it doesn't force their hand, which is great too.
Yeah. I think that's it's kind of a smart move, right? Gives you a bridge, gives you flexibility,
Yeah.
gives you kind of a life raft, so to speak. But you also have mental continuity in the film room.
Right.
AJ Dillon knowing the offense, it's just another mind in the room that has been there for years now, and that always helps speed up the process for new folks in the room, no doubt about it. So that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this draft falls, because this running back class, and I've said it before, I think is being underestimated because the position itself is being devalued or undervalued, and just kind of, I don't know, thrown under the bus a little bit in the league. So we're going to get into it, but it's really interesting. The depth and the talent in this draft is pretty fascinating. I'm kind of excited to see how it goes, but the way that this draft could fall feels incredibly unpredictable to me. Does it feel that way to you?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, maybe as we get closer to it, it'll kind of fall into place a little more. But from a Packers perspective, yeah, I feel, yeah, there's just a lot of possibilities of what they're going to do. Like, I think we can name off the positions that they're probably going to hit and draft, but it's a matter of like when they're going to get those guys. And I think it sets up for some surprises.
Absolutely. No, I'm looking at this, and as I'm trying to figure out who's good at each of these positions we're breaking down. I'm asking myself, where do you think this guy could go? Like, God, man, I don't know. Like, there's a lot of things that make you think a guy could go in the first round. Then you got to zoom out. Like, oh well, I don't know. How's the board gonna fall?
Right.
it to me it feels less predictable than ever. But maybe every draft feels that way as you're getting closer to it. I'm getting us kind of sidetracked a little bit because we're still talking free agency. Are there any other guys that you think that the Packers could, would, should add at this point?
Well, I was expecting a linebacker, and I'm really surprised that they haven't added one. Um, after the big McKinney and Jacobs signings, I wasn't expecting anything top of the market. But that was the position linebacker where I thought they would attack. I don't think it was a very good free agent market for linebackers, and the guys that were out there got pulled up, got snatched pretty quickly. So then it kind of fell apart. And right now, looking at linebacker, there's just nobody out there that would interest me. I think they should save their money and wait for the possibility that somebody's going to get cut, because we do see it around draft time, especially after the draft, as we get into, mini camps and stuff like that. Veterans start getting released. Teams draft guys at their positions, or it just becomes a money and a cap issue. A new coaching staff may come in and get a look at guys, and they don't fit the system that they want to run, so they're going to release them. Remember, they got Campbell in June. Go back, Mercedes Lewis, that he was a May signing. So guys do become available. And that's the big position to me that they really need to hit is another linebacker. I'm sure they're going to draft him, but I think you got to bring in a veteran. I would just be patient with that, save my money there. I do think, just to give you a name or two for guys that are still out there, Julian Blackmon's a safety from the Colts. There was a whole long list of safeties that were available. Most of them have gotten picked up. Blackmon's one of them. Also, Justin Simmons, who we talked about a couple weeks ago when he got cut by Denver. He's still available. I can't imagine the prices on either one of those guys being very high right now, just because, it's, even though we're only a week into free agency, everybody's
It's not a huge
off
market.
the market. Yeah, there's not much left. Teams are spending have spent their salary cap space elsewhere. So you still have the ability to go out and get another safety to pair with McKinney, which would be great because it's not a strong safety class, and you don't have to force yourself into starting a rookie potentially next to McKinney. So I think Blackmon and Simmons are two guys to look at. And then I wonder if they don't look for a veteran along the offensive line just to give them depth, because, earlier today, Yash Nyman signed with the Panthers. So there's another offensive lineman. We weren't expecting him back, but, it's another offensive lineman out the door.
For sure,
So,
not. Yeah, right.
yeah. So the depth just isn't there along their line right now. And they really need somebody to compete with Sean Ryan at right guard. Again, I think it's a position they're going to hit very heavily in a draft. Wouldn't be surprised at all if they take 3 offensive linemen. But maybe they go out and they kick the tires on someone to bring in as a veteran. I like Dalton Reisner, who played with the Vikings last year. Previous to that, he'd been with Denver. He's not going to come in and be, an immediate starter, but I think he can. I think he can really push Ryan if he doesn't, take his job from him. But he would be really good competition. He's kind of along the lines of a John Ryan, or I'm sorry, John Runyon. So yeah, I would like it. I don't expect the Packers to do it, but they have in the past brought in some veteran linemen. Rick Wagner will go back. Jarrett Veld here. They were veterans they brought in. So
Yep.
just, thinking out loud, that could be a position along the line where they go and they try to get a veteran as depth, or, as competition at right guard. So yeah, but I wouldn't expect much, if anything, before the draft. There's just because
Right.
there's nothing out. There's not that much out there. I shouldn't say there's nothing. There's just not that many players out there and available that would, upgrade their current roster.
Yeah, that's. I feel like we're kind of seeing this new trend with free agency where it opens, a few guys get plucked out, and then you go to the draft, see what you get, and then after the draft you fill holes. So that's probably what we're looking at. There are some guys out there that are still guys, right? And they may not be what you hoped they were, but like an Isaiah Simmons, man, I'm looking at this.
Mm,
PFF says he's
yeah,
unsigned.
yeah, he's unsigned, but I don't think he's a fit next to Quay Walker. Like they need somebody that can be a stabilizer for Walker, and Simmons is kind of like
He's still figuring it out,
yeah,
but
and he's
his
two
trajectory is
teams now.
upward.
Well, I mean, he's 2 teams now figuring it out, and he's got athletic ability, but he's just all over the place, and he wouldn't be you'd have to probably
That's a
play
fair point. He would not be as stable out
Quay
there.
Walker would have to be your middle linebacker most likely, and Simmons would slide to Will, and I think they wanna put, Quay at Will and not have him, call in the defense and just allow him to attack and run, and I think Simmons is he's that same guy where it's like,
Yeah.
he would just be all over the place. You need somebody that's more stabilized, I think, next to Quay, and that would allow them to use Quay and give Quay the freedom to run around and attack the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, no doubt. But it's guys like that that you could probably get him on a cheap 1-year deal
Yeah.
and plug him in as depth. Maybe get some good special team snaps out of a guy like that because his athleticism's off the charts.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
got a 4.340
He was
240 pounds.
top 10 or top 15 draft pick for a reason.
Top 10, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was only 2020. He guy's 25 years old. So, you look at a guy like that, it's like there's still some maybe the best football ahead of him. But we've seen it, right? Goot's done this a few times now where, like with Campbell, he plucked him out and, guy was a diamond in the rough. Same thing with Rasul Douglas. Same thing really with Keyshawn Nixon. So I say at this point in Goot we trust on the free agency front, but there's definitely guys out there that, are not slouches. There's still higher potential guys out there that they could add that could turn into maybe not all pro players, but significant starters for the team that you just don't expect. So always something to keep an eye out for, but they've made good decisions at this time of the year. We'll say that.
Yeah.
Charles Woodson being one of those.
Yeah, he didn't sign till right before the draft, though. Yeah.
Right. Or right after?
Right around.
Right before? But
Yeah,
either way, it was late. It was not
late.
the early free agency wave.
Yep.
But either way, yeah. So interesting things to think about there with free agency, but there's just not big splashes to be made at this point. We got our splash. We got Xavier McKinney, I think, is the one we were all rooting for. And then we got the bonus splash that came with kind of a bitter end to it, which, we've already done that segment. We don't need to go there anymore.
But I got to ask you, sorry, I'm going
to
change things up just real quick off topic. How do you, a week later, Jacobs now's the back, Aaron Jones is out. Do you feel any different, any better, any worse about it?
Well, actually, this might be a decent segue, and you didn't even mean to do that. Yeah. Well, because we're going to talk about some more running back prospects coming up here in a few minutes, and objectively, like when my heart is less involved now, we're looking at this and how the decision went to essentially swap out Aaron Jones for Josh Jacobs. It's just the right move on paper, right? I mean, he's younger. It's a decent deal when you look at the money that's being paid over time. It's not bad, right? Like the market's only going to continue to inflate. If you're going to get a guy who in theory is going into his prime and you're going to get the best years of his prime and you're only going to have to pay, well, not top of the market, but just kind of market rate essentially. That's pretty good. Lock that in, get 2-3 good years out of him and see where that goes. But I think that's also overlapping with kind of what we were talking about when we were talking about A.J. Dillon. You're going to invest in some youth here, right? You've got a running back class here that's worth investing in. But and when I pointed this out last time too, I think one thing that sticks out and is kind of clear is these guys aren't guys you're relying on in a leadership role year one. These guys are high talent, very raw, right? They're young, some of them. Obviously, we've talked about Braylon Allen. Jalen Wright's young as well. I think Jonathan Brooks is pretty young. So, a lot of these guys are pretty young. And you want them to be able to learn next to somebody who is doing it now, right? Like, think about how, Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers, right? And compare that to Aaron Rodgers, Brett Favre. Aaron Rodgers saw Brett Favre play some good football, but Aaron Rodgers didn't see Brett Favre play MVP football, right? Aaron Rodgers was playing his best football ever while Jordan Love was watching. And he had a front row seat. So it wasn't just he saw the guy on film. He saw what the guy did in the film room. He saw what the guy did more than most humans, right? So
Right.
he got to take notes to see how one of the best ever is doing it, right? Like, how is he accomplishing this? I think the Packers took a little something from that. Now, that's not to say Josh Jacobs one of the best ever, but he's one of the best in the game right now. And ideally, he continues to be that for the next few years. That's what you're signing him for. If you can get a rookie coming in, a guy who's 20 years old, and Josh Jacobs is 5 years older than that guy, and he can watch this guy work and try to emulate him, that's great. Now you're building kind of a pattern and a system and a process there. So I think that's what I would be watching for them to do. And this is, like I said, a great class to do it. So yeah, shall we dive into this a little bit and start talking some running backs?
Let's talk running backs.
All right. So I think the general argument at the top is Jalen Wright, Jonathan Brooks. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if everybody's got Wright that highly at the top, but
It's
I
just
think
as far
Brooks,
as running backs, right? Is you don't think everybody does? I think it's Jalen Wright,
I
Jonathan
don't.
Brooks. I feel like that's everybody's 1 and 2.
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen different things. I don't think. I mean, I think Brooks is debatable as far as if he's number one. I don't know if Wright's quite that high, but I like him, and I know you like him.
Well, it's definitely debatable for sure. I mean, this is a very unpredictable class.
Yeah, there's no
Um,
no doubt about number one. The kid that Atlanta took last year, and I'm forgetting his name, Bijan Robinson. There's no
Robinson, yeah.
Bijan Robinson this year. So, yeah, I mean, I like Brooks. He would be my top guy. I think he's a complete back, and he looked great last season with Texas, and then he hurt his knee. So, I mean, it's an ACL. I don't think it necessarily will affect him long term.
Right.
I think he's probably still going to be a second round pick. Maybe if he didn't have it and could have finished the season, they ended up going to the playoff. He had a few more games. Maybe it would have bumped him up, and maybe he would have been a first round guy, end of the first round. But I still think he probably goes second round, and I like him. I think he's the most complete back in this draft. And, it's from a Packers perspective, would they take a guy who's coming off an ACL injury? They have no history of doing something like that. So that's where I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't bet on it. But to me, he's my top guy.
Well, here's what I'll say about Jonathan Brooks, and this is not just to say things. And I'm certainly no expert, right? I'm not over here like I'm a former NFL scout. Not flexing anything over here, right? Like, we're just some football nerds that like watching football. When I watched him, and I sat down, I tried to watch a few games, watch Alabama, and his style to me looks like Aaron Jones. Like, it's the way that he kind of slips into some of the gaps that he's got. It's a very Aaron Jones-like movement. Like, there's just certain things that he does. It's just he looks like Aaron Jones. That doesn't mean that I think he's the next Aaron Jones. So let's be clear there. And what I think doesn't mean much at all. But it could be me missing Aaron Jones in some way. I'll accept that if anybody's got that kind of criticism. Oh, you just wish he was still here. Love the guy. But yeah, it looks like that's the player comp for me that I would say looks like Aaron Jones, but he's definitely faster. He's faster than Aaron Jones. He's a little bit taller, but they're kind of the same build if you look at them. But yeah, Jonathan Brooks, I like him. I like the running back, but for me, it's 1A and 1B with him and Jalen Wright. And I tried to figure out, like, all right, who's RB1 here? And I think it really just comes down to what you define RB1 as. And there's 32 definitions of RB1 across the league. So I don't know. I can't say, well, this guy's definitely RB1. You don't have that right now. Like you're saying, you don't have the Bijan Robinson, but Jalen Wright is a home run in a bottle, dude. Like, he is just every single play a threat to take off, and it's his acceleration and his top end speed. He gets there quick. Now, Jonathan Brooks has speed. He doesn't have the same acceleration that Jalen Wright has. Now, I will say Jonathan Brooks probably has more complete running back, right? Like I think he's got probably better vision, better balance, but you're splitting hairs. I'm not saying that Jalen Wright doesn't have good vision and doesn't have good balance, because he does. He's a phenomenal athlete. But if I'm sitting here and we're looking at this the way that a lot of people are talking about it, these running backs will be available to the Packers, right? And if certainly at the end of the first round, but we all assume in the second round. I do think that a Jalen Wright could sneak in at the end of the first round to like the Chiefs. That's to me seems like a very Chiefs pick. Just a luxury pick, really, and something that they know they won't have a shot at the next time around. But yeah, he's a guy that they love speed, and you don't need him to be RB1 for you, right? You just do running back by rotation and let Andy Reid have fun with this guy's athletic ability, and he just becomes an offensive weapon. But yeah, he's a weapon, man. So I don't know. That's 1A and 1B for me. Those two at the top, and they're both in play for the Packers. So that's where it becomes kind of difficult to predict. And we were talking about saying this draft to me feels difficult to predict. You can probably guess pretty accurately the top 10, maybe, because the quarterback position is such a question mark. But after that, it really is tough. It's very difficult to predict because you've got some interesting things at play. You're going to have some good pass rushers available, maybe when they wouldn't normally be, probably because of the rush on quarterbacks and some high-end receivers. But you've also got great DBs in there, some great cornerbacks. So there's a lot of players that are great players that are probably going to get pushed back because of reaching on other players. And that makes it very tough to figure out who goes where and how this falls. And then at the running back position specifically, it comes down to what you value. You know, do you value a guy, a big guy or a smaller guy, right? Do you need speed or do you need, Braylon Allen? You know, you're going to evaluate Braylon Allen and Jalen Wright very differently, and they could both be pretty damn good in the league, but they're just very, very different running backs. And I bring up Braylon Allen because I know that that's a Wisconsin favorite, and I think a lot of folks really are hoping to see the Packers take him. I think it'd be a neat pick, but he's raw, right? Like he's still young, as we've all talked about. He's raw, and he needs some work. So I actually think he could fall in the draft. I think that maybe he finds his way like into round 4, because you do have some more polished guys that are ready to step in and contribute. So we're going to see. But there's also a few other guys. Like I said, there's the thing that's interesting about this class is it is deep. It's a deep running back class, so it was actually hard to get through some of these things. I had to kind of narrow my focus a little bit. But one sleeper, if we can call him a sleeper, is Isaac Guerendo. He seems like a very, very complete back, and he's one that Wisconsin fans are familiar with. Obviously a Badger for a few years. Very athletic, right? He graded off the charts. It's like 4.33, I think 40, and he's like 225. That is a fast 225, man. So he's one that's very interesting. I went back. He's got good vision. He's got good balance. He's a complete back. Like he's a guy that can step in, and he is a little bit older, so he's probably matured a little bit, can take in a little bit of a leadership role. But he's one I would watch for it. I don't know where to predict that guy to go, because with athleticism like that, you're going to get teams reaching on him. It's like the Xavier Worthy effect, right? Where does that guy go now? Because we've seen how many times these record-breaking 40 guys get overdrafted. And again, that's not to say, we'll get into receivers later, but that's not to say that Xavier Worthy won't have a good NFL career. But he will be overdrafted because of his 40 time. If Al Davis were alive, he would be drafted even higher. Anyway, so those are some names to watch for. There's a lot of names to watch for in at the running back position in this draft. And you could have a lot of them go off the board in that round 2 to like 5 range. There could be a really high amount of running backs there.
So Packers pick at 41 in the second round. Do you think that there's a running back pick before then, or they have their pick of if they take a running back at 41? I'm not saying they're going to. I don't think they will. But when they're on the clock at 41, do you think all the running backs are available, or do you think somebody goes before pick 41?
I'll say this. There's a chance somebody goes before 41. There's a chance anything happens. But there's a real chance somebody gets picked before 41. I would say, Jalen Wright to the Chiefs is one I would really watch for, right? Kind of a luxury weapon for that offense. But that's where it's kind of interesting because Jonathan Brooks very well may be the best back here. But again, you get somebody reaching for that home run ability that Jalen Wright offers. And then if he goes say Jalen Wright does go to the Chiefs at the end of the first round. Okay, well, now at the beginning of the second round, how long does it take for somebody to now go get the next guy? And who is the next guy at that point? Is it Jonathan Brooks? Is it Isaac Guerrero because you like his speed-size combination? Is it Bucky Irving? Right? That point, like who's going to get who, where, and why? You're going to have so many variables at play. It's really tough to say. But I do think between 25 and 41, they'll have access to all of these running backs. And I don't think that they'll overdraft one. But they'll have a good idea of who's valued where. And that's what's going to be really key. I do think that they'll have all right, you put me on the spot at 41, what happens? You got a shot at probably drafting Jonathan Brooks, and I think it makes a lot of sense there.
Okay.
I'll say that little synopsis. It does. He looks a lot like Aaron Jones. He's got that style and a lot of those traits. But a phenomenal back, So
yeah, I like him a lot.
But then there's a few later to watch for. The kid out of Notre Dame. He's big. He's good. He's
slow though.
He's slow, but so is AJ Dillon. He's not that slow, actually.
Dylan tested really well, though. Dylan was like a 9 RAS guy. Yeah.
I'm comparing sizes. I shouldn't do that.
So, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to rattle off a couple more that really might be sleepers. The kid from South Dakota State, Isaiah Davis, he looks pretty good. Another kid, good size, good traits, right? Balance, vision. He's aggressive. Team guy, always looking for work, and that's been a good team. So they've had something good going there. He's one I think that may get drafted earlier than people think and have people wondering who's this kid. And then the kid from Troy is one that he's just fun to watch, man. He's such a cannonball. Kitani Vidal, he's like 5'8", 220, just a complete cannonball. And he's got incredible acceleration. Like I think his 10-yard split was like 1.53 or something like that. And fast guys are like 1.56, 5'8". So he's fast. He's got that lightning bolt acceleration. He could be a fun one to watch. But I'll say this, though, just about the Packers running back situation, I do think that they're more likely to go with a guy like a Jalen Wright, Jonathan Brooks, who's more of a speed home run hitter because they've got size in that backfield now. And they've said as much, right? They need both size and speed. They've talked about that in the past. So you don't have your lightning bolt back there. I mean, Jacobs is good. And he's not slow by any means, but he's 220. He's a bigger dude. Right. He's not there to be your small change of pace guy. So you need that guy. You need that shifty guy that's going to make defenses kind of sit on their heels a little bit. And that's where it's kind of the thing that's hard to figure out is how highly do they value that? Because if you value it that highly, they could take Jalen Wright somewhere in the end of the first round, early second
Maybe.
round.
I don't know if that's the thing. Like, how high do they value? Because Aaron Jones was a smaller, shiftier guy, but they didn't take him till the 5th round.
Well,
So
that was a totally different situation. That wasn't a Matt LaFleur offense. That wasn't
right, I know
Brian Gutekunst's scouting
it's
department.
right, but I mean they have a lot of Goody's doing a lot of same things that Ted Thompson did from a
Fair, totally
drafting
fair.
perspective. So maybe he looks at a smaller, shiftier back and doesn't place as great a value on it. They really haven't had those kind of guys. Like they've had Jones, but then you had Dillon. Jamal Williams was a bigger back, not
Yeah,
not Dillon size, but he was a big back. So
yeah.
yeah, it'll be that's interesting. Like I think they're probably, if I had to, and total guess, but I think they're going to look more for somebody that is more of a complete back that can pass, protect, pass, and catch the ball. Um, maybe and has the shiftiness, but in a bigger size, maybe in that like 215 to 220 range, something like that, instead of a guy who's a buck 90 or something, you know.
Exactly. No, and
So
that's why
that's
Jonathan Brooks makes a lot of sense.
yeah. Yeah, and I'll throw out a couple names, just guys who Trey Benson from Florida State,
Yep.
who I was surprised. I mean, he's a 9.7 RAS. Was not expecting that, and I think he ran like a 4.3. Yeah, 4.39 he ran at the combine, which is
And
incredible.
but he's another guy, and this is what I'm trying to point out here. He's fast, but he's also 223. He's a big
Well,
dude.
combine he was 216. So is
Oh,
he?
he's 216.
Yeah, at the
Okay, that's
combine,
different. That's different.
but you bring up a good point because sometimes these guys work out and they get themselves down to a certain weight because they feel like they need to be to
Well,
help
and
their
they
draft
can be in
position.
February,
Right.
right?
So what does he play at? Is he going to play at 223, 225? Like where is he? But I mean, I didn't realize he was that fast having watched him a little bit at Florida State and that athletic. So very impressed by Benson. And then and I got to do more research on this kid, but I'm just going to throw his name out there because he was another big Raz guy. And um, the more I've learned about him, the more I like. But that's Tyrone Tracy from Purdue. He was a 9.77 Raz. He's a former receiver, and they've converted him over to running back. He's been productive with them.
Okay.
Could certainly help you in the passing game if he's got wide receiver experience. But yeah, he's just another name I'll throw out there. Again, I don't know as much about him, and I want to look into his game a little more. But I just found it interesting that he tested so well and that he comes from that wide receiver background.
Yeah, and there's certainly more names to throw out there, right? So just because we haven't mentioned some guys here doesn't mean that there aren't more to be mentioned.
Right. Absolutely.
And so Trey Benson's one. It's a great one, and Bucky Irving's one that a lot of people are talking about. And just to be fair, I haven't even gone back to watch a whole lot of Bucky Irving. I just haven't got there yet. I'm not a pro scout that gets
Yeah.
paid to do this whole full
You're
thing,
not?
but I know, right? YouTube, help us out here.
Seriously.
Blake Corum's another one that I think could end up going higher than people think because I think NFL teams value a guy like him who's, just a reliable guy. He may not be the best athlete on the field, but he's going to get his job done.
Yeah.
He's going to do
You
his
see it,
job.
and I've seen a lot of mocks. It's Packer fans, but I see a lot of mocks with him going to the Packers, and that might just be simply because everybody knows him because he played at Michigan, and
Right.
he was a really good back at Michigan, but he's a smaller back, and he's small, but he's solid. But I don't think he has traits that really stand out to you. Like there's some
He's not a guy
shiftiness.
you're building around long term.
Right. He's like a complimentary, if he's your number two, you're pretty good there. But he's not a home run hitter. He's not going to be a guy that's going to run you over too much. So he's kind of like a tweener back to me. But there's definitely, he has good qualities. There's shiftiness there and obviously tons of production. But I just wonder what qualities, what athletic abilities really stand out about Quorum.
Yeah, and I've seen some clips where I don't even remember the team it was against, but man, his balance was just incredible. He made a cut that was very, very impressive. So he can do it, right? And Ray Davis in Kentucky. There's a lot. Will Shipley from Clemson. And another one, Dylan Johnson. He's one I was actually looking at earlier, and I was like, he looks pretty good, man. Like, not a lot of people talking about him. I don't think he ran a
He
great
was really
40,
good on
but
Washington.
yeah, he was really good for Washington. So there's a lot of guys that are really good running backs. You look at it, you're like, gosh, the guy's pretty stinking good. So it could be an interesting run, like I said, between like the second and fifth round, where you could have a lot of running backs. And I think it's really going to come down to what teams value and how much there is of that guy, because there are these, like 220 fast guys, and then there's these like 240 big dudes, and then there's the
Right.
210 home run hitters, and what are you looking for, and what do you
Yeah.
value, and how much of that is there available? That's what's going to determine all this, and it's incredibly unpredictable. Frank Gore Jr. is one that he's been a solid back down there in Southern Miss. I think somebody's going to pick him up, and he's going to probably make at least a great, reliable running back too for a long time, right? Um, so
The
keep
kid
an
from
eye out.
USC, Marshawn
Yeah,
Lloyd,
yeah, the
is
kid
another one.
from he looked pretty good too.
Mhm.
Keep an eye out on the running back position, because this is one where you're looking at it and you think that the Packers are content. It's going to be hard for them not to take two running backs out of this class. There's just that much available, and when you get later in the draft, when some of those guys are still available, you might have a fifth round talent or fourth round talent available in the seventh round. So they may get their guy in the second round. It's going to be hard not to take another one later on, because the value, I think, is going to be there. There's just so many of these guys available.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah, I
that's
get that.
that's the the Packers Weekly podcast version of NFL draft prospect breakdown for your running backs there. So if we have grossly missed anyone, please let us know, guys. Appreciate the shout out, Acme. Um, love the feedback, and always appreciate people when they love the shades. We gotta keep it fun here. We're not trying to
That's
take
right.
ourselves too seriously. So if
That's what we're
anybody's
known
hating on
as.
the shades, keep doing it. We don't care. But appreciate Acme there, not throwing any hate at all. He's digging it. But
He's a good
yes,
kid.
so that's the running backs. Is there anything you think that I missed, or any giant questions we need to answer here?
No, no, it'll be interesting when the run on running backs goes, because I think it's going to be in that late second to through the third round into the fourth round. That's where a lot of these guys are going to start getting picked off the board. I think it's even with bringing Dylan back and signing Jacobs, I still think it's a position the Packers are going to draft. It wouldn't surprise me if it's a third round pick, and it really wouldn't even surprise me if it's the second of those two second round picks. I mean, they use a second round pick on Dylan, so they're not afraid to do it. But I think it's probably going to be more so in that third, fourth round area where they take it back. And then to your point, they may very well double up, and they've taken some seventh round backs in the past. They haven't panned out, but they've at least tried. So maybe they go back to that well again.
Yeah,
Well, just last year they took the kid Lou Nichols. So, and he never, he got hurt and didn't make the team, and didn't work out. But they may go that route if there's somebody there that they like.
Yeah, I just think that there's a lot of talent here. It's going to be hard for them not to go get more than one. So keep an eye out. Those are some guys to watch for. There's some others. What I'd like to do if we get a chance before the draft is have one episode where we cover Division 2 and Division 3 guys. I already briefly shouted out one Division 3 guy back when we were talking around the combine, but we'll get a chance to do that again with receivers here. But there's usually some guys that are worth keeping an eye on coming out of those ranks, so it's fun to throw a spotlight over that way every now and then. So we'll try to do that. But there is a little bit more linebacker talk here. One thing that got my attention, because we've talked about this, my guy Peyton Wilson, man. I'm a Peyton Wilson fan. I want to see this guy become a Packer. I don't care what round it is. Goot will do it in the right round. But is this too much? Is it too high at 26? Because PFF has him ranked at 26 on their big board now.
I mean, I personally, yeah, I think it's too high. I wouldn't have a linebacker at all, any linebacker in the first round in this draft. But that's me. What do I know? PFF knows a ton more than I do. But I think if you go around and you look at the draft analysts, especially the well-known ones that we all know, Daniel Jeremiah and Dane Brugler and all those guys, that would be way too high on their boards too for Peyton Wilson. So love the talent, love the athletic ability, but I wouldn't take him in the first round. Second round, sure, but I don't think he's. I think 226 is too high. And again, we've talked about him, and I think we talked about him last week when we got into the linebackers. He's had a lot of injuries, knee injuries and shoulder injuries. I think that takes him off the Packers board most likely, or at least knocks him down several rounds on their board. So I don't know how much of a possibility he is anyway for them. But the athletic ability and the big plays that he can make, it does jump out at you. I think 26 is a little too much for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. When I saw it, I was like, he's climbing, man. And definitely an athlete. He's he's got a little bit of that Miles Jack kind of thing, right? Where he's a great athlete, good linebacker, questionable injury history. So I wonder where that'll end up. But that's where, for me, the way that this draft seems to be shaping out as we start to, look at all the players that are out there. People are getting a chance to take some time, look at film. You got other players weighing in on players. Like I like to watch Steve Smith. I think he does a great job breaking down the receivers. It just feels very unpredictable, right? And it feels like the Packers are in this place where you're at 25, you're at the end of the first round, so there's this group of guys where you're really excited about them, but not until the second round. So I've seen a lot of people trading back and getting, get out of the first round, take your 25 and turn it into two more, like a second and a third, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
What are you doing now? What are you doing at this point if you're Goot, man? Are you gonna try to hang out at 25 and see what falls to you? Are you gonna trade up and maybe go after a higher quality player? Or are you gonna give yourself more swings in that pool of these guys that are running backs, linebackers, and maybe deeper receivers, tackles in that second and third round?
I'm staying at 25 because I think there's going to be some players that get pushed down because there's going to be a run on quarterbacks. We know 4 for sure are going to go, and there may be a surprise fifth one, whoever you want to throw out there. There's going to be several receivers go in the first round. There's going to be corners. There's going to be offensive linemen. I think it's going to push some players down, and that could very well be a corner that they like. It could be a tackle that they like. I think it's going to set up for them to kind of have somebody or maybe a couple guys to choose from that kind of fall into their lap that maybe they weren't expecting there at 25. And I also think I wouldn't, and we've talked about this before, they have 11 picks. Do they really need to come out of this draft with 11 players? Probably not. But I still wouldn't be opposed to trading back a little bit. Say if they went from 25, and I don't have the draft order, but if they went from 25 to 40 or 38 or 35, that would be okay. You pick up extra picks, but then it gives you the flexibility to later on throughout the draft move around and move up for other guys. Because I think you can really look at it, and there's probably a tier of players maybe from 20 to 50 that are kind of going to be grouped together. They're going to have the same grades. There's not going to be a whole lot separating them. So why not trade back and pick up another couple picks that you can use later for either taking guys or moving around your board. So I would be fine if they trade it back. Trading up, I mean, it's always a gamble because you're going to give up a lot to move up. And depending on how far you're going, I should say, maybe you're not giving up that much. But if it's really somebody that you like, sure, why not? I can't say who they should trade up for because it all depends on how it's going to fall, and how far do they have to move up? How much are they willing to give up? For me personally, I wouldn't be going up too far where I'm giving up my second round picks to do it. If I have to give up a fourth round pick to go up a few spots, okay. And especially if that's a guy, they have a first round grade on him. He's their only guy that's left with the first round grade. Sure, then I could completely understand that and go and do it. But I think they're more likely to trade back. And I think the most likely thing that they're going to do is staying where they are, and then it would be trading back, and then least likely would be moving up.
So I have a hard time arguing. I think you're probably right, but it's very hard to predict. My question
Yeah.
is what position is worth trading up for? Right? You're not going to trade up for certain, like you're not trading up for a running back, right? So,
Right.
what position are you going to trade up for if you're at 25 and, maybe you're trying to get into that 15 to 20 range?
It's got to be a premium position, right? I mean,
That's what I'm
that's
thinking.
generally what they take. Now, they did take a linebacker in the first round. That's really not a premium position for them, but they did take Quay Walker.
Yeah.
So they're not trading up for a quarterback. So what's it? I mean, it's got to be an edge rusher, a corner, or an offensive tackle. And it's been a while since they took an offensive lineman in the first round, right?
And we've looked at the offensive tackles a little bit, and we can go back to them if we need to. But this is a deep class of tackles. That's where I have a hard time believing that you
Right.
would trade up for a tackle at this point.
I think you can get one at 25.
I think you can get one at 25, and you probably get a pretty good couple of them in the second round too.
Yeah.
And that's another one where it's like the talent's pretty good, but some of these guys might last a lot later than they should. That's the part that's very, very interesting to me, because I think the GMs have a much better pulse on those things than we do, or possibly could, because we're not in any of these war rooms or have access to any of these big boards. But I don't like to try to predict that. There's a lot of people out here trying to predict, oh, he's not going to go that late, or he'll be gone by then, and you know you just don't know. Every year there are incredible surprises in the draft, and we all go like,
Yeah.
"What? No way! That's a reach!" And you don't know that. These GMs making the decision, know a lot better than you do. So I'm just fascinated to see how things do fall. I think you obviously know a few things, right? You know probably the general first half of the first round, right? With the exception of what the quarterback run looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and as we get closer, you're going to know, like you said, the first half, you're going to know the players. Maybe not the exact orders or teams, because there's going to be trades, but we'll probably be able to, 15 players you're going to be able to say, or 10 players at least, 10 to 15, you'll be able to say, like, they're going to be gone. Packers aren't going to have a shot at them.
Right.
So, but that still leaves you a lot of other ones. And it depends, like you said, on the run. There's going to be surprises. There's always teams that'll take guys that you're like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. And then that's going to push down another player closer to Green Bay.
Exactly. And the players that are getting pushed down, like in the case of receivers or maybe even offensive tackles, our players are just like, dang, that guy should not be available. So we can get into some of that. We're making our way to the latter half of this episode here. But what about cornerbacks, man? Tease me a little bit on cornerbacks. We're talking about premium positions here, and there's some good ones, but I think the question is where is the drop off and how bad is it?
I think there's a top tier of guys, or a top group of them, that are going to be first round guys that we can say, today these guys are first round, and most likely aren't falling to the second day. Then there's kind of like another group that's going to be second round, third round, and then from there it gets like all over the place. And I think the class is strong at the top, and there's some pretty good depth to it throughout, but there is going to be that fall off where I think you get like late day 2 into day 3, and it's going to be kind of one of those, certain teams are going to like guys a lot, and they're going to take a corner, and it's going to surprise everyone. Like, wow, they're taking this guy at the end of round 3. Didn't think he'd be picked to, late on day 3. So I think there is a drop off. I don't think it's a steep drop off or anything like that. I think it's a fairly deep class, and I think it's strong at the top. I don't know if there's a Sauce Gardner corner in this class, but I think there's a lot of solid starters coming out of it. And there's some guys with some versatility that can probably play inside, that can play nickel. And then there's some other players that you got to be careful with them. And because I think maybe they played outside in college, but they just don't have the athletic immeasurables, or they don't have the height to hold up out there, and they're going to have to kick inside and be nickels. So then it's going to be a big projection. Can they do this full time inside at nickel? Because they probably won't be able to hold up outside on an island. And the Packers, they've shown they haven't really valued the nickel position. Maybe that changes. Maybe they do draft somebody purely for that position, but they haven't really done that. It's been plugging in Nixon, and before that, who the kid whose name is escaping me went on to play for the Vikings and bounce around. They got him from the Eagles. I don't know why I can't think of his name, but they got him.
Rigger?
No. The corner. It'll come to me. But anyway, they signed him. He was like cut by the Eagles. They picked him up, and they had him for a couple of years. He started when Pettin was here, and I think the first year with Joe Barry, and then they brought Nixon in.
Cornerback. Sorry, I was thinking.
Yeah, nickel. Yeah. I can't think of his name, and it's going to drive me nuts. But they haven't put a big investment in it. So do they invest in it this year? Do they go out and target somebody that they want and take a nickel cornerback on the second day? They haven't done it, but it's possible. So I think it's a strong glass overall. And we are getting late on this podcast, but just some of the first round guys, Terry and Arnold, Quentin Mitchell. I like those guys a lot. Mitchell, we've talked about from Toledo. He went down
like him.
Yeah. And I think the big knock on him was he played at Toledo level of competition. He went down to the Senior Bowl and he was one of the best players on the field. Offense, defense, either team in the Senior Bowl, have your pick. He was one of the best guys down there. He's very good. Had a great combine. Like, he's legit. Would love him in Green Bay. We'll see if he lasts till 25. Probably not, but you don't know.
Yeah, you don't know, but I don't think so.
I mentioned Terry and Arnold from Alabama. He's really good, and I feel like he's kind of not getting talked about a whole lot. In the draft process. I don't think he worked out at the combine, but he's got good size. He was a safety, came in as a safety, transition to corner, so he kind of gives you flexibility. He did play inside and outside, so he's got experience doing both. Really like him. Nate Wiggins. I like Nate Wiggins too, but he measured 173 pounds.
Ooh,
and at his pro day, his pro day was back up to 182, but they've taken one cornerback throughout. Ted Thompson, Brian Gutekunst being their GM. They've taken one cornerback who was under $190, and that was Shamar John Charles, who I think was a 6th round pick.
Yeah.
So they just don't take.
He hung around for a little bit, but he's out. Yeah.
Right. He was a special teams guy. Yep. So they just don't take light corners, and that's what Wiggins is. I think he's 6 foot or 6'1", but he's skinny, and he's allergic to playing run defense too. And I think that's going to be a turnoff for Hafley in a new scheme. But I like him. He can fly. He runs great. I just don't know if he's a Packer corner. And then, and this will probably be a guy we talk about more, but who, Packer Twitter's favorite, getting mocked to him in every mock draft, Cooper DeJean. I like him. He didn't test, but he is a really good athlete. And I guess he's going to test closer to the draft because he's recovering from a broken leg. But he's a really good athlete. He's got good size. He was productive in college. He can return punts. But I don't see being able to keep him outside playing man coverage. I don't think he's going to hold up. So you got to have a plan for him. Are you kicking him inside the nickel full time? Are you putting him at safety? Or are you kind of making him a hybrid where he's going to play a little safety, but he's going to come down and cover the slot at times too, and not have to spend that much time outside? Because I think if you're going to draft him and say he's our starting outside corner opposite Jair, maybe he can do it from an athletic standpoint, maybe. But I think his best position is going to be closer to the ball, and it's going to be inside. But we can get into him a little more later on because it's going to be an interesting evaluation. I think he's a better zone corner than he's going to be a man corner in the NFL. But those are some of the first round guys, and we're going to get into more, second round, third round, into the third day corners because there's some interesting guys, some guys who tested well at the combine that really surprised me, and also a couple guys with some size that are intriguing too. So. I think it's a solid position at corner, and it's definitely, to me, I think it's a strong need for the Packers, and I could see them. I know they just took Stokes a couple of years ago in the first round, but I could see them going there again and taking a first round corner.
Yeah, No, I could definitely see them taking a first round corner. That feels like one of those positions where they'll just take that first rounder anytime, any circumstance, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
there's a corner. He's the best player available. Take him. Don't care.
Yeah. And he's an
Um,
alien athlete. Yep.
yeah.
They
So
love
that
this.
would not surprise me. I know Max Melton is one that a lot of
Yeah,
people are
we'll
really
talk about
excited
Mac,
about.
Bo's little
Yeah.
brother, and I think he
Yeah.
could be a nickel.
Yep.
But I think he's
Absolutely.
actually got. I think he could hold up a little bit outside too.
Yeah, and it's interesting, with DeJean and everything. I definitely think he's a safety, um, but then you have to evaluate him against the safeties in this class, and that's a different
Right.
evaluation.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's kind of in the running back category for me. It's like, what do you value? What do the Packers value right now? What are they looking for? I think that's a much broader question at safety than it is at corner, right? Because you definitely have Jair, you have Stokes, you have Valentine. They brought back Ballantyne. We didn't mention him on the re-signings.
Right.
Um, so you've already got, at least assuming everybody's healthy and makes it back to camp healthy. Hopefully Stokes does. Um, you've got 4 guys there, and the skill sets you have with those guys. So what is the skill set that you're looking to either add more depth to or add that you don't have? Like, what's the complement that you don't have?
Mm.
To me, if you're drafting DeJean, you're doing it with the idea that he's going to be one of your starting safeties. I think that's got to be the play. But what do you value there? And does he have it or does somebody else have it? And where does that go, right? And you may again, that's where it's like it's very interesting, and it's funny how people will die on a hill because like, oh, he won't do this or he won't do that. It's like, man, you just don't know. You don't know. Um, you may value that guy as a corner and maybe middle of the first round, but if you're taking him as a safety, he wouldn't be like maybe a second or third round kind of pick.
Right.
So that's kind of how these guys are looking at it. And all we can do is sit here and go, hey, look at this guy. And Cooper DeJean's good, man. Like, you watch film,
Yeah,
and
he's a good player.
the one thing that I'll say, and this is not to say what he could be or like this is his player comp, but again, kind of the player that he looked like whenever it's like he has similar mannerisms to or plays safety, especially the safety like the zone position, similar to is Charles Woodson. Like I saw him like
Wow.
the way he broke on the ball in some cases looked like Charles Woodson. That doesn't like
You're
that's
not.
like
Yeah, you're
that's like
not.
one puzzle piece in
Yeah,
a
yeah,
thousand,
because
right? Like
that's Charles
so
Woods is an all timer.
right. So it's not to say, oh, he could be the next Charles Woodson. I'm not going to say that because Charles Woodson's pretty special. But there were certain things he did that just in my mind was like, dang, that looked like Charles Woodson. So that was cool, and I do think he's more of a zone guy.
Oh yeah.
But the thing with DBs is you got to be consistent, man, and you got to have really good instincts. And I think that that's something that they've done a good job of identifying. Like with Jair, for sure, he was a first round pick. That wasn't quite as a big of a deal. But like Valentine, getting him in the 7th round, that was great, man. So they're going to be able to scout these kids the right way. I'm just interested to see how it falls. I really think Quinyon Mitchell, you won't probably have a shot at him, but man, if they did, like if he fell to that 15 range and they could make a move up for him, that would be pretty cool. Like I think he's one of those that you put him in a Packers uniform for the next 10 to 15 years. That's just my thought. We're going to do
Yeah,
more
I would love
quarterback
him.
talk next week too.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot more guys to dive into, and shout out Acme Army again. Shannon Sullivan was the name I couldn't think of, the
Ah,
nickel cornerback. Yeah,
appreciate you.
yeah. That's my bad. I should have known that one. And he was a pretty forgettable player, though, in my defense, because he wasn't that
Fair
good.
enough.
But he was their nickel for a couple years, so
He
it just
was.
shows you they haven't invested much in the nickel position. It
Yeah.
might be
No.
time.
Hopefully they do. I mean, and the way that they do that is just by investing in cornerback depth, which
Yeah,
in theory they've already done with Keyshawn Nixon, but we've all agreed we don't want to see him in the nickel anymore. But we'll see how that plays out. I just there's talent here. It's weird because there's a lot of different skill sets, right? So it really does come down to what do you prioritize and what do you value. The It's similar with the receivers. And the receivers, I think, actually might even be easier for us to identify for the Packers because there's some we know that they won't go after. The 5'8" guys, Malik Washington looks great. I don't think the Packers are going for him. But there are some that probably will fall into that 20-25 range that shouldn't. And that's where it gets very interesting for me because I think the Packers will stick to best player available as far as how they approach the whole draft. And if you're getting there and you see a receiver who's hanging around and actually could be there at 25 that probably shouldn't even be there past 10, that's where you're going, oh, man, I think we have to make this move. And the player that I think that could be is A.D. Mitchell from Texas. A.D. Mitchell. Phenomenal talent, well-rounded athlete, very fast, very good route runner. He looks like he's going to be a really good receiver in the NFL. You know, when you watch the guy, it's just like, dang, like that guy looks really good. Why I think he'll make it that far is because, one, there's definitely 3. There might be 4 receivers better than him in this draft. But it's splitting hairs, and there might be more than that drafted ahead of him, right? Because I think Xavier Worthy gets drafted ahead of him just because of that 40 time. And Xavier Worthy's not a bad receiver, right? He's got the potential to be a good receiver, and he's also got a blazing 40 time. So I do think that there will be a reach for him. So A.D. Mitchell could end up in the Packers' range of drafting, and he's a freak. He's a freak.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think he's definitely going to be there because you figured Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, those guys are gone. Brian Thomas will probably go before their range too, before 25.
Those are easy to assume.
Yeah, I think he'll probably be there. You know, to me, part of the question is he was at Georgia, he was at Texas. He was never the guy. Like, you know, he didn't put up the numbers. He wasn't the production kind of receiver that you would expect for him with the talent that he has. He's got the athletic ability, he's got the skill, but like, why could he never really put it together? What's the issue there?
Fair question. I don't know that I have. I mean, I think one thing is you're limited to the offense you're in, right? So I won't go.
Yeah.
I didn't go back and look at a whole lot of Georgia stuff with him. But at Texas, he was surrounded by playmakers. You know, we've said a few of them, right? You got Jonathan Brooks at running back. You got Xavier Worthy at the other receiver. There's another good receiver that they had there too. And their quarterbacks were all right. You know, Ewers wasn't great, though. You know, he wasn't lighting the world on fire. So there was only so much ball to go around. And I think their offensive line probably needed some work. And the offensive line can be surprisingly limiting to receivers because if you have, especially fast receivers that need longer developing routes to really take advantage against the defense. But you got 2 track stars there at Texas, and you know you can try to run long developing routes, but if that line can't protect and the quarterback's not great, you know things fall apart really quick, and it can be hard to get those guys the balls that they need. So that would be one thing, and I can't say that I've gone and done super in-depth on all of that, like how that did, like how many times was the quarterback sacked. But what I did see on film didn't look great, and I don't hear a whole lot about any Texas linemen. But anyway, that's just a sidebar. On paper, the dude looks phenomenal. You watch him on film, and he's got some routes that just drop your jaw, right? He runs some routes against Alabama's cornerbacks and makes them look silly, man. Silly. And they're top-notch cornerbacks, right? You just named them. We were just talking about them. So anyway, we don't want to get too deep into that, but he is one that I think will fall to the Packers and maybe should not fall to the Packers in another draft. A guy that's 6'2", 205, running a 4.33 is a rare talent. So he's an exciting one to keep an eye on. But this receiver draft class is deep. we rattled off a few there at the top, but there's several others out there, and there's a lot that people have their eye on as far as like Xavier Leggett out of South Carolina is kind of a trendy one people are talking about. Malachi Corley is one that's interesting. Yak King, he's got the most yards after catch, but just a beast, man. He's a big dude. He's 5'11", 210. This guy is probably your Jaden Reed backup, right? And he's fitting in that way. That's one thing I like about A.D. Mitchell, to kind of loop back to him. He can fit in any of those positions. And we've talked about before what the role of receiver 4 is really to know all the roles of receiver 1, 2, and 3, right? You need to be able to be receiver 1 for Z, X, and F receivers as the receiver 4 on the depth chart. I think he could do that. But Malachi Corley is probably a little bit more of a Jaden Reed type guy, hanging out in that F position, doing a little bit more of the gadget work, but very intriguing guy later in the draft. I say later, probably like a day 2, day 3 guy. Right. Javon Baker is a trendy name that a lot of people are talking about out of Central Florida. He was at Bama before that. Solid looking dude, 6'1", 208. He's got the right build, had great production at UCF. If you listen to him talk, he sounds like an intelligent guy as far as football intelligence goes. He's got the right motivations, team guy. So there's a lot of guys we can get into. One I brought up before was Hayden Hatton out of Idaho. He's an interesting one. Big production, very highly graded on the PFF scale the last couple years. Obviously, competition's not big, so he stays lower on the radar, but we've seen guys like that come out and do very well. So he's one that I would keep an eye on. But there's a lot. There's a lot to like about this receiver class. Obviously, Coleman out of Florida State, it's a big guy. You got another big, fast guy in Walker out of UNC. There's a lot, So we're going to get into
class.
It's a deep, deep class. We're going to get into some more next week. The kid from Mount Union, speaking of Division III, just shout out there, Wayne Ruby. I mean, he's shattered records at Mount Union that were held by guys who ended up being very good NFL receivers. So he's another one to keep an eye on that most people probably aren't aware of. So, yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot of receiver names to watch for out of this draft class. It's exciting, and it's very, very unpredictable, in my opinion. It's a lot like the running back class. There's a lot of different tools, like a Malik Washington, a 5'8", 190, 195 type guy who's a phenomenal route runner, but he's just not the guy that you're looking for, right? The Packers just don't need that smaller guy and that kind of a specialty guy. But there's a lot. There's a lot of talent out there in this receiver class. So we'll talk more about it next week. But man, you're going to be hard pressed to come out of this draft without probably 2 more receivers. It's going to be an interesting competition at the training camp, the Packers training camp in the receiver room this year, because it's too deep. It's like the running back class. Like, you might get that guy early on, like an A.D. Mitchell, even in the first, second round, that you just got to get him because he's not supposed to be there. And you're going to have a hard time going the rest of those rounds without receiver being the best player available again. So it's just something to think about. Anyway, we've gone deep on this podcast, man. This is one of our longer ones.
A lot to talk about, yeah.
Lots to talk about, lots to cover. There's some fun topics here. Anything else on your mind here before we move along?
No, I don't think so. I think it's going to be full steam ahead for the draft. I think free agency's already quieted down substantially. I don't expect any big news between now and the draft as far as free agency goes. Maybe signing or 2 might trickle in, who knows, but it's going to be all draft all the time now for the next 6 weeks or so, 5-6 weeks.
That's right, all draft all the time. We're just there's not much else to talk about unless we get another Twitter storm from another player, which is kind of fun. We'll do a little bit of dabbling in that. But otherwise, we're going to leave those things alone. We're not getting into other teams' dramas. We'll stick with our own team, and there's not a whole lot of drama around this team right now.
which is
unfortunately.
nice. It's a nice change this offseason.
It's lovely, isn't it? I'm
Yeah.
enjoying it, feet kicked back. But yeah, we're having some fun. So thank y'all for hanging out with us this week on the Packers Weekly Podcast, part of PackersTalk.com network. If y'all would check us out on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all those social medias. Give us a subscribe on the Packers Talk YouTube channel. We would love that. It would do big favor for us. It'll only take you seconds. We really appreciate it. Certainly engage with us on Twitter. We have fun going back and forth with some of y'all, and we get involved with some of the players a little bit, sometimes stirring the pot. But it's a lot of fun, and you can learn a lot of things about Packers football when you pay attention to those things. So join us there and spike that like button here wherever you're watching that. And we will see y'all next week, Packers fans. Go, Pack, go.